Thanks for joining us for this episode of Colorado Conversations. I'm Andrea Henderson, morning anchor of Fox 31, and we're joined here by Jason Valderrama with Community Medical Services. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Andrea.
And we're talking about something that is really growing, but a lot of people might not know about, and it could be concerning, especially maybe to parents out there, to loved ones, and that's Kratom.
Yes.
And it might be something that people have heard of, but don't necessarily know what it is. So let's just get into it. What exactly is Kratom?
Yes, I'm so glad we're talking about this because it is something that is so much more prevalent. We're seeing it on gas station signs. We're seeing it at smoke shops, and it's something that is becoming a lot more common and actually poses a lot of risk. So it's really good to just be able to unpack it a little bit.
And there's probably this maybe misconception where you see it, it's so easy to get. You see it, like you said, on signs, like gas stations or convenience stores, whatever it may be. So you see it on a sign, you can buy it easily, and you might think like, oh, it can't be that bad for me.
Exactly.
But there are some dangers with it.
Exactly. So Kratom it comes from a plant, originates in Southeast Asia, and it's been around for centuries. In the 1800s, it was something that was being used to help with like boosting mood or like help with some pain. And it wasn't until like the 90s that it came to the States. And then really in the last 10 years is when we've seen it start to take off. And it is a derivative of the leaf. So the leaf is what actually gets put into a powder, into a capsule, into a drink. They're even putting it into gummies. And so that's where it starts to get really concerning because that's something that kids might be interested in trying. So yeah. Those are the ways that people are taking it right now.
We see that with marijuana too. You put it into the fun little gummies or whatever, and people see that.
Exactly.
And that's how kids might end up with it. So what exactly is it, and why are people taking it? Like, what does it do?
Yes, great question. So the active ingredient in the leaf is called mitragynine, and what that compound does is it binds to the same receptor that fentanyl does or that heroin does. So it's binding to this opioid receptor. In low doses, it is kind of more like a stimulant. People will take it to try and treat with anxiety or some depression or just to like boost their mood. And so it acts like a stimulant when it's taken in low doses, but as people start to take higher and higher doses, it acts like an opioid. And so that's where you start to get into the realm of addiction and dependence and withdrawal, and that can happen really quickly.
Is this something that you think parents or loved ones really know about? You think about parents out there watching their teens, or I guess anyone with loved ones.
Yeah.
People always have concerns about, alcohol or obviously stronger drugs like an opioid or something like that. This might not be something that's on everyone's radar.
Exactly. I think it's more flying under the radar, and I think that it is certainly a risk because it was originally being marketed to anybody and everybody, kids included. And thankfully, we've got some new regulations, legislation in the last few years to be a little bit more careful around it. So now you have to be 21 years or older to purchase. You have to, not the companies that make it, they can't put more than a certain amount of this active ingredient in it. And it's also not allowed to market directly to kids. So there's things that are there to try and help make it safer, but it's still something that, like we were saying, a lot of people don't know about and might think, oh, it's over the counter or it's natural, so it can't be that bad for me. So there's definitely a lot of risk.
And I know, like you said, they put regulations in place, 21 up, some other regulations that you mentioned. But is there a certain demographic that you're seeing that's kind of going towards it? I don't know if this is something that you've recognized, if it is people who are older adults, or if it is something that more teens are kind of latching onto.
Yeah, as I was looking at numbers, it's about 100,000 kids under the age of 18 that have been exposed to it or have reported taking it. So that number is definitely growing. It's grown a lot even in the last couple of years. Still a relatively small population for those under 18, but we have people, so our clinic has 6 locations around the Denver metro area, and we're seeing people coming in, especially in the last 3 years, and they aren't taking other opioids. They're not taking other substances. They've just gotten stuck on Kratom, not realizing, kind of like we were talking about, what it is, and developed a use disorder, a Kratom use disorder. And so it is something that is emerging, and I think the last 3 years is where we've really seen it skyrocket.
So does this have elements in it that are addictive to people?
Absolutely, because it's binding to that same receptor that opioids bind to. It is something that causes dependence, causes withdrawal, and I've had clients who've come in and said, I was only taking it for a couple of weeks before I tried to stop and realized I couldn't. And so it can really grab a hold of people really quickly.
Is it similar? Obviously, there's all kinds of different drugs, but like a nicotine or an opioid, that there's different ways that they react.
Exactly.
Is it more similar to like an opioid?
Yes. In the doses that we're seeing, it is very similar to opioids. And when somebody gets dependent on an opioid and they go through withdrawal, they feel miserable. Opioid withdrawal feels like you're going to die. I have clients describe it as the worst flu that you've ever had, GI symptoms, and just it feels like you're not going to be able to make it through. And so when somebody is taking this over-the-counter natural product and then they start to feel that way, they're like, they don't know, there's no other option, I'm just going to keep taking it. And I think why we've seen it take off is because it's become more synthesized and more potent. And anytime you increase the potency of a drug, your chances of addiction and your chances of having really intense withdrawal are going to go up.
That has to be frustrating for people too, because with certain drugs, the risk of taking them, or you've heard stories of people, like stronger opioids, whatever it may be. With something like this, I'm sure, like you said, someone maybe just went into a convenience store, bought it, was taking it for a couple weeks, and then they're having these crazy withdrawals.
Exactly.
I feel like that would just be like you would just be so confused. Like, what is going on with my body right now?
Exactly. And then also, because like we were talking about earlier, it's not well known. It's even less known that there's good treatment available. And so because it acts so similar to an opioid, at our location, we're really focused on opioid treatment. And so we have people who are coming in for things like fentanyl or heroin or prescription pain pill addiction. And so it's very unknown that, I could also, if I'm struggling with Kratom, I could also use these same medications that are being used to treat opioid use disorder. They can also be used to treat Kratom use disorder.
And on that same topic, are you seeing, or have you seen people where they take Kratom and then they're not getting the same effects, so then they move on to something stronger?
We do see that. I think the reason people are taking it most often is because they're trying to get off other opioids. And one of the most common myths out there about Kratom is that if you are struggling with opioids, you can use Kratom to get off of it. So certainly there are people who go from Kratom to other opioids. There are people who stay just on Kratom, and there are people who are already on opioids trying to get off of them using Kratom. And oftentimes what we see is they're just stuck now on this and still needing that support of an opioid treatment program, because we really focus on medications, that's a big part of it, but we also focus on counseling, therapy, the behavioral health side of things. And when you put those two things together, your success in treatment is just so much better.
So some people, they're looking to Kratom to help them with other addictions. I guess, what are the long-term dangers then of Kratom? Because some people might be like, well, this is better than the alternative. But it sounds like that's not necessarily the case.
Anytime you're taking a substance, and this is again a general principle, what happens is it feels good at first. It is meeting some need. And then what happens is, as your body becomes tolerant to, you don't get that same effect. And so you have to take a higher and higher dose. And as you take that higher and higher dose, it also doesn't have the same effect. And so you just kind of see this downward spiral of trying to get back to that feeling of this felt good, never really being able to get there, and then also feeling terrible if you don't take the medication. And so it's such a roller coaster and such a downward spiral that people feel hopeless and feel just like I can't win. Like there's nothing that I can do to get out of this. And so that's why we want to talk about treatment, because there is hope.
And with something like Kratom, like you said, people will have to continue to up the dose if they get used to it. So it's not something, if someone starts doing it because they think it's going to help them with opioids, where they can just stay on this like low level amount forever,
Exactly.
your body's going to adapt, and
Absolutely.
it's just like a natural thing where you'll want a higher dose?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And just like you were talking about earlier, you likened it to marijuana. You know, you think about marijuana back in the day as like not as potent, and then you start looking at the strains and the potency that we see that's being used today and the amount of THC that's being used today. And there's similar trends as you look at other drugs, specifically Kratom, where the Kratom that was used in the 1800s was just the leaf by itself, and so lower potency. And in the last 3 years, what's been happening is those leaves are being synthesized, and the active ingredient is being synthesized, so your potency is going up, and that's where you start running into the risk of overdose. You know, there's been some really high-profile cases, both in Colorado and in the national news, about people who are struggling with Kratom, and you certainly can overdose on it because it operates in that same way as an opioid does and can cause respiratory depression.
So it can actually overdose, it could potentially kill you?
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. Yeah, so people are getting to the point where, not always, but if you were to mix it with other drugs, things like alcohol or anti-anxiety medicines like Xanax, other medications that suppress our respiratory drive, that's what causes overdose, and we are certainly seeing that for people with Kratom as well.
Thinking back to, because you're talking about the past 3 years or so, and it seems like this has really gained popularity.
Yes.
So what happened? I guess, when did this start emerging? Has this been something that's, I mean, you talked about the 1800s,
Yes.
So it's been around a long time.
Very long time.
But why within the last several years has this just gained so much popularity?
Yes, introduced to the States in the 90s, around 2015-ish is when it started becoming more popular. And then last 3 years is when those more synthesized products, the way those are marketed is as 7-OH. That's 7-hydroxymitragynine, and that's basically taking this active ingredient and putting a lot more of it in there. And so that's where we've seen Kratom use disorder really skyrocket because it's more potent.
And I think of like I don't know if it's at smoke shops or like convenience stores, or because if marijuana, obviously it's more regulated where you go to a dispensary and you get it. It seems like this is something that it's just starting to emerge, so maybe there's not as many regulations. I don't know, maybe I'm...
No, you're on the right track because it is new and emerging. It's harder to regulate. So we have these things like it can't be sold to anyone under the age of 21, but it can be bought so easily online. And we have these regulations that it can't have more than this certain amount of 7-OH in it, and yet you just change the label and market it as something different. And so there's just still a lot of workarounds, and it's still very easy to access. So that's why I think it's still something that we're going to see continue to grow.
All right. Well, I appreciate you, Jason, just kind of discussing these topics. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
That's good.
All right, we're talking to Jason here, and we were talking about Kratom and how it's becoming this emerging trend, something that you specifically have really seen within the last 3 to 5 years, thereabouts, but it's something that's been around for, I mean, a long time. And during the break, we were just kind of talking about a situation where someone saw a story and they didn't even realize, you know, maybe the negative impacts and that there was treatment out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was such a cool story because we were trying to get the word out. We want to advocate for and educate people on what the substance is, and that there is treatment options available, that there are different modalities that we can use to help, both medications and counseling therapy. And so we had this individual who saw the news story and called in and was like, hey, this is something that I've been using for 10 years and I can't stop. And I saw the story and I'm just interested in learning more. He wound up coming in, he wound up starting treatment, both the medication and the counseling piece, and got to see him last week. It's been 3 months since he has used any Kratom. And to think about that, just that there is hope, you know, of being on a substance for 10 years and not being able to stop, and then to be at that milestone of being, you know, 90 days in, it was huge, and we just want to share that so that other people who maybe have loved ones or themselves are struggling, that they know that there are options.
And because it's something that maybe a lot of people don't know about, or it's just not talked about a lot, people probably don't realize that there are those options out there. So someone like your patient that you're talking about, and obviously we don't have to get into too many details, but over the 10 years, was it something where he was just continuing to do more and more and more?
Yes, and especially in the last 3 years, like we've been talking about,
Mm-hmm.
as it becomes more potent, it is something that can just grab a hold of you and is so hard to stop. And so I've been so thankful to be able to see his journey and others like it. And when people really engage in both things, the medication side of things, we use Suboxone or methadone. And those medications can just have a lot of stigma around them too, where people think, oh, I'm just trading one drug for the other. Why would I want to get on those medications? But using those medications in an environment where you have the counselors and the therapists and you have the full spectrum of treatment, we see people succeed.
So let's talk about what treatment looks like.
Yep.
If someone sees them and they're like, this is something I'm going through.
Yes.
I didn't realize there was help out there. What is the next step? What should people do?
Yep, walking into a clinic that just does on-demand intakes is the best way to get started, because a lot of times what we see with any use disorder is I might be ready right now,
Mm-hmm.
but 2 or 3 hours from now when I'm starting to go through withdrawal and I'm feeling terrible, like I'm not ready anymore.
Yeah.
And so we're in 6 different locations around Denver, and we have walk-in treatment, so people can just come in. They're going to get met by the front desk, do some screening. They're going to get to meet with a counselor, talk about their history. They're going to get to meet with me or another medical provider and talk about which medication is going to be the right option for them. And our goal with medications is to really help people through that withdrawal period, get onto something that's going to stabilize instead of be this constant up and down of chasing not being sick.
Is this something that you're seeing more and more coming into your office? Obviously, we know opioids
Yeah.
and the impact that can have on people,
Yes.
and the more known drugs that people talk about and
Yes.
have been an issue. But this is something that's kind of emerging.
Yes.
So do you see it more and more now?
We are, yeah. Fentanyl is still our #1 in Colorado. That's the main thing that we're treating. We still see heroin. We are still seeing prescription pain pill use and addiction. But Kratom is something that in these last 3 years with the higher potency products we've seen take off, and I think is going to continue. And so the more that we can share that there are treatment options available, I think the better.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how these drugs emerge, and someone out there kind of gets their idea that this is something that they want to push, and
Yes.
they find ways to get it to people and make it addictive as well.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too, for a loved one, a parent. Are there signs to know if someone that you care about is taking Kratom?
Yeah, there's always going to be, as somebody gets dependent on a substance, there's going to be collateral damage, and there's going to be periods where it's like I'm able to kind of hold things together. But as this progresses, as there's progression to taking higher and higher amounts, it becomes hard to function. Your world gets very small, and it just becomes about how do I not get sick, and how do I get this next dose that I'm going to need to just be able to function. And so all other things kind of start to fade away, and it can become really hard for loved ones to see somebody struggling. And I think the main thing that I would want to share on that point is you can't want treatment for somebody hard enough in order for them to pursue it. They have to want it themselves. And the best thing that we can do for somebody who we care about who's struggling is to approach it in a compassionate way, and to be able to educate and say there are options for treatment. I'm willing to go with you. I'm willing to help research and give you some guidance, but it has to be that person saying, I want to do this. And that can be really hard to wait.
As far as people coming in for treatment, have you seen, is it people who are older, or do you see teens who have gotten addicted to this already, or is that not something that you're seeing as far as coming into your, through your doors?
Yeah, and through our doors we haven't had any teenagers, the under 18 that we were talking about earlier. We see it though in every demographic and every socioeconomic demographic. It doesn't really discriminate, and so that's true for fentanyl, that's true for Kratom as well, that it can be anybody, and it's not just a specific person or demographic that we're seeing.
Especially when it's so readily available,
Yeah.
too. I think people might, go into a store, they see it, maybe just pick it up because they're like, what's this? And
Exactly,
try it,
yeah.
not even realizing
Yes.
the impact that it can have on them,
Yep.
which is...
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we want to make sure people understand, and we've talked about it a little bit, that over-the-counter or natural doesn't equate to safe. And that's probably one of the main messages we want people to know, is that a use disorder and addiction can develop really quickly from something like this. The second thing we would want people to know is that there are good treatments available. And then the third is, there's so much stigma around addiction, and it's still treated as like this thing that we shouldn't talk about or can't talk about, or is that this moral failure. And I think trying to help people understand that this is a disease that has really effective treatment available is something that would really help to bring that stigma down.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take one more quick break, and we'll be right back. All right, so let's continue our conversation about Kratom. It's this emerging trend, but there are treatments out there. So if there's someone watching and you thought you're alone in this, that's not the case. So what are some good options for people?
Yeah, I think going to our website, communitymedicalservices.org, is a great place to start. Like I said, we have 6 clinics around the Denver metro area, and all of those clinics do treatment on demand. So being able to walk in same day and being able to meet with a counselor, being able to get started on medication, can just be that step that people need to take. And so I would encourage people to walk in. I would encourage people to just do some research that there is treatment available, and that we can start it on the same day. It just can make all the difference.
And people for your office, they don't need to, or do they need to make an appointment? Can they just walk in the door and you'll take care of them?
Exactly. And I think that's the best model, because if you make an appointment, if you're like, hey, I want treatment, but we can't get you in till next week, the chances of overdose, the chances of just never coming back, it's so high. So being able to come in that same day and see somebody is huge.
All right. Well, Jason, we appreciate it so much being here. This is such an important topic that a lot of people probably aren't talking about, don't know about. So you can also visit your website, communitymedicalservices.org.
Thanks so much, Andrea.
Yeah, appreciate it.